Hello everyone, it's 7 o'clock. Another unwanted milestone in the worst cost of living crisis in a generation could be hit this morning. The cost of filling an average family car is forecast to tick over £100 for the first time, a day after the biggest daily fuel price jump in 17 years. It's a blow to the Prime Minister's attempt to make a fresh start as he prepares to potentially extend the right to buy scheme to help people get on the property ladder. We'll ask the Levelling Up Secretary Michael Gove if it's really going to work. The shadow Levelling Up Secretary, Lisa Nandy's also on the programme. Plus, we'll talk to the former NATO Secretary-General, Fogh Rasmussen, to get his take on what the future holds for Ukraine and President Putin. It's Thursday, the 9th of June.
Pumping us for more money. The price of petrol set to hit a painful new high, costing us £100 to fill up a family car.
From revolt to reforms, reports the Prime Minister may extend the right to buy scheme so lower paid workers can use housing benefits to buy homes. A legal challenge to the plan to send asylum seekers to Rwanda. As Sky News speaks to someone facing that fate through a translator.
I will face certain death. I will be executed, but I prefer to be executed in Iran rather than being sent to Rwanda.
Stubbing out a bad habit, the move that could raise the legal smoking age every year to stop youngsters doing it. We'll bring you this breaking story on this morning's show.
We'll reveal new details about the driver of a car that hit a crowd, killing a teacher and injuring 14 students.
Pulled after protests, cinemas drop a film about the Prophet Muhammad's daughter after it sparked outrage. We'll talk to the producer and the protest organiser at 8:30. Also this morning. For our dear friend, the Foo Fighters announced 2 all-star tribute gigs in London and LA in memory of the drummer Taylor Hawkins.
Careful.
And I'll be joined by the actor Max Beesley, who's starring in a new Sky Max drama reimagining the classic science fiction novel, The Midwich Cuckoos. Hello, good morning. The Prime Minister this morning is setting his sights firmly on pressing the reset button with a major speech on housing. It's been reported that he may extend the right to buy scheme to lower paid workers, allowing them to use their housing benefits to buy homes. Well, we'll ask the Levelling Up Secretary Michael Gove shortly how it'll all work. Plus, the cost of living crisis is set to squeeze us all more from today, with the price of filling up an average family car with petrol expected to top £100 for the first time. We'll bring you those figures live at 9:30. So what is the state of play on the forecourts? Well, the average price of unleaded petrol is now 180.73 pence per litre. That is up more than 2 pence in the last 24 hours, the largest daily increase in 17 years. Diesel is also up and now averages 186.57 pence a litre. That's up more than 1 pence since the day before. Well, petrol prices have risen by 36.4% over the last year. It means the average family car with a 55-litre tank now costs £99.40 to fill with unleaded. And all eyes are on the RAC's latest data, dropping around 9:30 this morning, which could see this figure tick over the £100 mark for the first time ever. Well, Sky's Ashna Hurinag is at a petrol station for us this morning. Ashna, what are the figures looking like there?
Well, at the moment, Jayne, you're looking at sort of 197 here, and that's just petrol. But as you say, it's never been so expensive to fill up your car. On Monday, we were talking about 178 pence per litre. On Tuesday, it rose by another 2p. The highest that figure has jumped in a day in 17 years, a trajectory that's simply not sustainable. The government in March introduced a cut to fuel duty by 5 pence, but there are some concerns that fuel duty is not being reflected on some forecourts. There are now suggestions that retailers should be named and shamed if they don't give that discount to consumers. Look, on some places, though, it is much higher. On the motorway down this morning, in some service stations, you're looking at more than £2 per litre already, and diesel is already at a record high. The RAC says, though, the peak is yet to come.
Ashna, thanks very much. Well, I'm joined now by the Levelling Up Secretary Michael Gove here in the studio. I mean, it's astonishing, isn't it, to think it's going to cost over £100 for most people to fill up their car. How high does the government expect fuel prices to go?
Well, the situation is difficult for many people, and, of course, it's all a consequence of the war in Ukraine. And, again, we don't know how the shockwaves of that war will continue to affect the energy market and the price of petrol for people who are hard-pressed and filling up their cars. But we have taken action to try to deal with this situation. The Chancellor's reduced fuel duty. And, of course, we keep under review all the measures necessary in order to help people with the cost of living.
But that 5 pence fuel duty, and as back in March, has been wiped out. It was wiped out almost within the week, actually, by the increasing prices. Could the Chancellor cut it further?
Well, we always keep things under review, but one of the things we do want to make sure is that that cut in fuel duty is being passed on to the consumer. So one of the things that we do need to do is to make sure that on every forecourt, that every outlet is making sure that it doesn't take advantage of this situation to build up excess profits. Well, I think we do need to keep a watch on this, and I know that the Competition and Markets Authority and others will always keep an eagle eye in order to ensure that we don't have a situation where companies are taking unfair advantage of consumers.
Supermarkets, some putting up prices by as much as 5 pence a day. Is there nothing the government can do to stop that?
Well, as I say, it is important that we look at the behaviour of individual retailers, supermarkets and others, and see what the pattern of evidence leads us to conclude. But I think it's also important that we do all recognise that the ultimate cause of the increase in oil prices, the increase in energy costs overall, is war in Ukraine. It's a devastating conflict, but we do need to make sure that Russia does not profit from its aggression.
But what about the fuel companies themselves? Should they be taking lower profits, do you think? Are there any in particular that you've got your eye on?
Well, again, you know, the Chancellor has been clear with the energy levy that he's introduced that those companies that are making huge windfall profits will pay their way into helping people with the cost of living challenges that we all face at the moment. Nobody likes increasing taxes, but the Chancellor is vigilant and on the side of those people who are struggling most at this time.
But what about the supermarkets? What about the people delivering the fuel? Could they not? Should the profits that they are making not be targeted as well? Well,
as I mentioned earlier, there are government agencies that are in a position to monitor what's happening. Again, I don't want to single anyone out because these are tough times for companies as well as individuals. But if it is the case that we do have companies that are behaving in a way which is anti-competitive, if we have companies that are taking advantage of this crisis in order to generate profits that are excessive and unwarranted because they're behaving in an anti-competitive fashion, then we can take action.
OK. Let's move on to the plans that we're expecting the Prime Minister to announce today. It's about right to buy, isn't it? It's about helping people who are on housing benefit buy their homes. This was an idea, of course, that was pioneered by Margaret Thatcher that she later said she regretted and has been derided by a lot of people. Why is the Prime Minister announcing it and why now?
I think the only people who are deriding it are people who, in many cases themselves, own their own homes and don't want to see the prize of home ownership extended.
I think the criticism of it was that when these social houses were passed over into more people's ownership, they weren't replaced. And so, therefore, there wasn't the social housing to help those coming up behind who needed it.
That is a fair point. And one of the things that we will be doing is making sure that there is a replacement, a like-for-like, one-for-one replacement.
How long would that take, though? Because, of course, we all know that developers are sitting on loads of land.
Oh, yeah.
It's hard to get social housing built, and a lot of social housing is built as a 1 or 2 flats in a big private development. Well,
we're taking steps. Yesterday, I introduced legislation into the House of Commons that means that there will be a new levy on developers. That means that when new developments occur, when new homes are built for sale by the big housing companies, we will extract some of the money that they make But when planning permission is granted, the value of land increases. We'll take that money out, and some of that money will be set aside explicitly to make sure that there is more affordable housing, more council housing for people who need it.
But how can you say this is going to happen within a set time frame? I mean, you know, if a council sells 20 houses today to tenants, they're not going to have 20 new houses tomorrow for the next lot of tenants, are they? It's going to take years.
Well, the way in which the levy works means that people can be assured that when planning permission is granted for new development, that there will be money in due course.
But it's a long-term thing, isn't it?
Councils can borrow against that in order to invest. The truth with housing is that we need more homes of all kinds. We need them in the right places. We need them to be high quality. We need them to be beautiful. We need there to be appropriate infrastructure alongside that. But one of the ways in which we can do that, as our legislation that we introduced yesterday demonstrates, is by having a planning system that is sensitive but also welcomes the right development.
In terms of the money, though, my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that you can't get means-tested benefits if you have savings of £16,000. Anybody who wants to buy a home, and unless they're getting an 100% mortgage, needs some kind of deposit. If you've got £15,000, say £14,999, so you don't go over that cap, that's a tiny deposit for any house. There are no homes in the UK that you can get for £100,000, especially in London, of course. How on earth is the government going to square this financial circle?
There are properties outside London that you can, but you are quite right that one of the challenges, I mean, there are two. One is making sure that we have more new homes. The other one is making sure that people have access to mortgage finance. And one of the things that we're looking at is a way in which people can save explicitly for home ownership, and that those savings can be disregarded or set aside for the purposes of people receiving the benefits to which they are entitled. So we're looking specifically at a savings vehicle that people can use in order to make sure that they can save for that deposit. Because home ownership is not just good for individuals, it's good for society overall. We want people to have a stake in the future. We want people to be able to invest in their own home. We want people to have somewhere safe and secure, warm and decent in which they can raise their children.
But if people are on means-tested benefit, and just look at the fuel prices today,
yes,
the cost of food as a result of the Ukraine crisis, most people who are on means-tested benefits are worried about getting through to the end of the week or to the end of the month. They're not going to be able to put aside money. It's a pipe dream for most people that they can possibly save as much as £10,000 for
well, you are right that times are tough at the moment, and you're also right that the number of people who can aspire to home ownership has been reducing over time. That's why we're taking action, and this action is intended to ensure that once we weather the particular economic difficulties that we face at the moment, that we can ensure that people are back on the path to home ownership. It's absolutely vital that we reverse the decline in home ownership that we've seen over recent years.
Isn't there also the issue, though, that if you do sell homes to people at a reduced price, because that is also part of it, that it would make it easier for people on low incomes to buy them, the cost of replacing that property is more than the cost of selling it. There was a pilot scheme in the Midlands back in 2018. Authorities there said they'd replace one for one. The average sale price was $137,000, but to build a new house to replace that was $280,000. So this costs an absolute fortune for the government. If you're going to be, spending £100,000 to replace each house, that's a huge amount of money. Where will that come from? Is this new money?
It will come from the overall parcel, the overall envelope of government spending at the moment. We expect that we will cap the number of people who will be able to benefit from this initially, and then it will grow over time. But it's important that government does invest in bricks and mortar. And one of the things that my department does already is to spend hundreds of millions of pounds in making sure that we can assemble the land necessary to build more homes, particularly in urban areas, because there is a pressing need when we have so many people on waiting lists, so many people in temporary accommodation, to see more homes built, and that means more social homes as well as more homes to own.
What will the cap be of people who can do it?
Well, we're thinking at the moment about exactly how many can benefit each year, and that's something that I'll be discussing with housing associations because, again, of course, we have the resources to be able to fund a programme of this kind, but we want to make sure that housing associations come with us and they recognise that their balance sheets are going to be robust in the event of
but you must have a ballpark
offering more homes.
If you're costing it.
We have costed it, but again, I don't want to get into speculation about the exact number.
Are we talking, 100 people, 1,000 people, 1 million people?
More than that, but again, one of the things One of the things that I know is that once you get involved in a property auction like this, you never know where the numbers are going to be. So I won't get involved in speculating at this stage about the exact numbers.
Because the problem is, when you don't talk about the exact numbers, it leads people to say, well, hang on, if we don't know exactly how many people it is, this could be, half a dozen people. It's a very catchy policy which the government is rolling out in a week which has been a really tough week for the government. And some would say, oh, it's interesting timing that this has been popped out this week.
Well, it's part of a package of housing policy on which we've been working for months now, and as well as the extending the right to buy to housing association tenants, it's also the case that we're overhauling the planning system. It's also the case, as I say, that we have a new infrastructure levy that ensures that we can get more money from developers. It's also the case that yesterday we announced new powers for the social housing regulator to make sure that social homes are decent. There is a big range of policies that the government is bringing forward in order to make sure that people can own their own home, and that for those who are renting, that there is appropriate protection as well. So this has been in the pipeline for some time, and it is part of the suite of policies that the government is bringing forward to show that we're on your side at a time of economic difficulty.
Let's move away from housing to the situation with asylum seekers in Rwanda. There was a plane due to take a number of people out next week. There have been a number of protests about it, and it looks like the Home Secretary's plan is going to face a legal challenge. Do you think this is a realistic way of stopping this? Do you think that this plane next week will actually go?
Yes, I do. And the Home Secretary was clear. We always anticipated that there would be legal challenges. There are some well-funded law firms that, understandably, from their point of view, want to test this policy, but we believe that it is the right policy. We've secured a cooperation agreement with Rwanda, which means that we will be in a position to support that country and also support them as they accept asylum seekers who come here. It's absolutely vital that we take steps to break the business model of people smugglers who are trading in human misery. What we want is a robust but also fair policy on immigration.
So you're not worried?
No, and I think it's also fair to say that at the same time as we're dealing with the problem of people smuggling and illegality in our migration system, we're also showing generosity. The British people are showing generosity towards people from Ukraine. My department has been responsible for working with the Home Office, and as a result, we have more than 60,000 people who've come from Ukraine in the last few weeks and months to the UK. And I think that the British people want to see our borders protected, tough and robust laws enforced, but at the same time generosity extended to those people who are in genuine suffering.
Generosity, compassion, open-mindedness, all things that we would like to be known for in the UK. We've got a film about the daughter of the Prophet Muhammad, which has been pulled from a number of UK cinemas. We spoke to Sajid Javid yesterday. He said he was very concerned about growing cancel culture. Do you agree with him over this? I
always agree with the Health Secretary.
On everything?
I can't think of anything in which I disagree with Sajid about. Possibly he supports a different football team to me, but apart from that, I don't know.
So you get on well with him. What about the leader? How did you vote for him this week? Did you give him your support on Monday?
Enthusiastically, yes. I think that it's...
Because you've not always been an enthusiastic friend or supporter, have you?
No, I made a mistake in 2016, a misjudgment. If you've been in politics for a little while, as I have been, then, there are always mistakes that you can look back on. But no, I think the Prime Minister is doing a good job.
Really?
Yeah, I've been privileged to work alongside him, when he made sure that the Brexit entanglement, the imbroglio, was broken. I worked alongside him particularly during the COVID crisis. He was very seriously ill, recovered in order to lead the world's most successful vaccination programme and a booster programme that saw us emerge from COVID ahead of other economies. And also, we've been touching on the situation in Ukraine. You don't need to take it from me. Just listen to what Volodymyr Zelensky said when he heard that the Prime Minister had won the confidence vote on Monday. He, an embattled war leader, expressed his delight that Boris, in his own words, one of the strongest allies the Ukrainian people have, had been vindicated in that vote.
So you wouldn't run against him as a potential new leader?
Oh, God, no.
What would you say to the 148 MPs who didn't agree with you? Have you been out rallying for him?
Yes, I can understand why some of my MP colleagues have concerns, and I think it's important that over the course of the next 2 years that we demonstrate that the government is focused on delivering for everyone across the United Kingdom. So, one of the things I think we need to do is to move away from a concentration on some of the, the Westminster preoccupations towards the people's priorities. And in that sense, what the Prime Minister was saying today in Blackpool about extending home ownership and about helping more people onto the property ladder, that is exactly, I know, a concern that many of my colleagues have. And I hope that, however they voted on Monday, when they look at what the Prime Minister is saying and what this government is doing, that they will feel reassured that we're on track to deliver what we were elected to deliver in 2019.
Michael Gove, thanks very much for coming in and for joining us.
Not at all, thank you.
Well, let's get a quick look at the morning's papers. The Telegraph is leading on fears that the price of a tank of petrol could hit £100 for the first time after petrol prices jumped by 2p yesterday. £100 to fill your family car. That's the headline in the Mirror, which calls the rise in fuel prices a petrol crisis. The Guardian also focuses on that hike in petrol prices, the biggest daily price rise in 17 years, along with a forecast that the UK's economy is set to slow to a standstill next year. The Financial Times leads on the warning from the OECD that apart from Russia, the UK is on track for the worst growth in the G20. Whilst the Times says that the Prime Minister will today announce plans which would let lower-paid workers use their housing benefits to buy a house and end rules that prevent the use of well-paid payments to get mortgages. Meanwhile, the Express reports Boris Johnson will set out his most radical move yet to cut household bills in the wide-ranging speech. 3 days of rail strikes at the end of June will disrupt trains for almost a week, according to the Eye, with just 1 in 5 passenger services expected to run. And the Daily Mail has a word that the coalition of charities and border force trade unions are mounting a legal challenge to halt plans to deport migrants to Rwanda. Well, let's get more on that story we were just talking about with Michael Gove. This legal challenge launched by human rights groups to halt next week's planned deportation of asylum seekers from Britain to Rwanda. As we were discussing there with the Levelling Up Secretary, he says it doesn't worry him. Well, the British government announced in April it had struck a deal to send potentially tens of thousands of asylum seekers to the East African nation. A Home Office workers told Sky News that they are worried that the plan puts lives at risk. They spoke out just days before the first flight is due to leave. Our Communities correspondent Lisa Holland reports.
No more charter flights! We want human rights!
There are just a few days now until the first flight is due to leave, and campaigners are doing all they can to stop it, demonstrating outside the Rwandan High Commission and launching multiple legal challenges. But Sky News has learnt of concerns raised inside the Home Office where the strategy is being implemented.
Oh, please.
We've spoken to a Home Office worker who's been in the Asylum Department for a number of years. Their words are posed and voiced by an actor.
I feel quite ashamed to work for the Home Office. I think this policy is disgraceful, to be honest. There's disbelief this flight will happen.
The government says it wants to end the trade of people smugglers transporting asylum seekers across the channel in small boats. Instead, it plans to send an uncapped number of people to Rwanda to have their claims heard.
It feels like we're taking part in human trafficking, transporting people against their will and paying another country to take them. The majority of staff who work for the Home Office are in it to try and make people's lives better, but we feel like we're being forced to implement a policy that is the opposite of that.
This is an Iranian man who we're calling Bahram, who we can reveal is one of the first asylum seekers due to be sent to Rwanda. He's seen here giving evidence at an international human rights tribunal last November. He says he was a police commander in Iran, but fled after refusing to fire on anti-government demonstrators. He's now in a detention centre near Gatwick Airport after crossing the Channel, but told of his fear at what will happen next, speaking by phone through a translator.
Sending me back to Iran I will face certain death. I will be executed, but I prefer to be executed in Iran rather than being sent to Rwanda.
Bahram has been sent this removal notice, telling him he's on a direct flight to Kigali Airport in Rwanda on June the 14th. Plans are so advanced, he's been told he has a luggage allowance of 25 kilos. He's refused to sign the form. Housed in accommodation like this, the Home Office says it will work with the Rwandan government to offer safety to those seeking asylum, and those recognised as refugees will be given the opportunity to rebuild their lives.
And the Uganda are killing.
Critics don't believe that and say they'll fight the policy every step of the way. Lisa Holland, Sky News.
The government could be about to raise the age at which people in England are allowed to smoke. A report commissioned by the Health Secretary is expected to suggest that the legal age be raised every year so that the current generation of children will never be able to buy tobacco products. A shortage of cancer doctors across the UK could be leading to delays in patients being diagnosed, according to a new warning from the Royal College of Radiologists. It's already estimated that as many as 50,000 cancer diagnoses were missed during the pandemic, and staffing shortages are only getting worse. Well, this morning, the Royal College of Radiologists is sounding the alarm over these shortfalls. Their report has found that 97% of clinical directors are worried about backlogs and delays for patients. The UK is currently 1,669 radiologists short of required standards. That's a shortfall of 29%. Of those, 200 posts have been vacant for a year or more, with West Wales having the lowest ratio of specialists. A study in the US suggests eating 2 portions of fish a week could lead to an increased risk of skin cancer. Out of more than 490,000 adults surveyed, researchers from Brown University found people who consumed around 300 grams of fish a week had a 22% higher risk of malignant melanoma than those who ate around 22 grams a week, although contributing factors that could influence results like weight, smoking and drinking history were also taken into account. Still to come on the show, I will talk to the former Danish Prime Minister and ex-NATO Secretary-General Anders Fogh Rasmussen as his foundation hosts a democracy summit focusing on the war in Ukraine. We'll talk to the parents of a gambling addict who took his own life, as new data reveals a higher prevalence of online gambling in deprived areas. And just after 8, I'll be joined by the Shadow Levelling Up Housing and Communities Secretary, Lisa Nandy. Now, authorities in Germany say they're keeping an open mind about possible motives after a man drove into a crowd in Berlin. A teacher was killed and 14 of her students were injured. Police have arrested the driver, a 29-year-old man with dual German-Armenian citizenship. Well, I'm joined now by Siobhan Robbins, who's in Berlin for us. And Siobhan, what have we learnt over the last 24 hours?
Morning, Jane. Well, we've spoken to the police this morning who say, of course, they are still investigating. But at the moment, they've told us there are signs suggesting this isn't a terror-related incident. Now, just to remind people about what happened yesterday, it was around 10:30 in the morning in a popular Berlin shopping street when this car drove down, hit a crowd of people, killing a teacher, injuring at least 14 students, and continued to then mount the pavement a second time before crashing into a shop. Now, the 29-year-old driver, a German-Armenian, as you said, was arrested on the scene and is being questioned by police. But this really put fear into the heart of Berliners, because it was just moments from the site of yesterday's crash that in 2016 there was a terror attack where someone drove into a crowd of people at a Christmas market, killing 13 people. So you can imagine immediately people were extremely worried that this was a repeat. But at the moment, Interior Minister here is saying there are signs that the driver may have been having mental health problems and was running amok.
OK, Siobhan, thank you. Well, to a developing story now, and a search is underway for 2 people who are missing after a boat capsized in Devon. 2 others were safely rescued from Rodeford Lake by emergency services and are now recovering in hospital. Another pair were checked over and discharged by paramedics. Twitter is reportedly planning to offer Elon Musk access to its fire hose of raw data on hundreds of millions of daily tweets in an effort to push forward the billionaire's acquisition of the social media platform. Musk says the deal, struck in April, cannot proceed unless the company provides more information about the prevalence of fake accounts on its platform. The US House of Representatives has voted to bring in a series of new gun control measures, including plans to raise the minimum age for buying semi-automatic guns from 18 to 21. But there's little hope of proposals becoming law, as the plans are expected to be rejected at a later vote by the Senate. The push comes after politicians heard harrowing testimony about the Texas school shooting, including from an 11-year-old girl who survived by covering herself in her classmates' blood and pretending to be dead.
He shot my friend that was next to me, and I thought he was going to come back to the room, so I grabbed the blood and put it all over me.
An Arizona man convicted of murder in 1984, killing an 8-year-old girl, has been executed. It is the state's second execution since officials resumed carrying out the death penalty last month, following an almost 8-year break. 66-year-old Frank Atwood died by lethal injection for murdering Vicky Lynn Hoskerson, whose body was found in the desert. The Foo Fighters have announced 2 tribute concerts in order to commemorate the life of their late drummer, Taylor Hawkins. Well, the first gig will take place on the 3rd of September at London's Wembley Stadium, with a second concert in Los Angeles later that month. Hawkins died at the age of 50 in March, while the band were on tour in Colombia. Time for the weather now.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, rain spreading in today will be followed by unseasonably strong winds tomorrow, with gales near northwestern coasts. It's mild and fine for most, but northern Britain is rather grey, with fog on the hills, and near eastern coasts, Ireland cloudy with outbreaks of rain.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Now, an Egypt-based research team has discovered the well-preserved remains of a new species of dinosaur. It's been described by researchers from Mansoura University as having, in their words, a squashy face, similar to a bulldog's, and tiny stumpy arms. Scientists discovered the dinosaur's vertebrae during an expedition in the desert back in 2016. They are obviously very pleased with their discovery. You do wonder when you look at these images of dinosaurs, though, could they have stayed upright? Well, let's return to the 21st century. Can you imagine what it would be like to live amongst the dinosaurs? Well, wonder no more.
Don't move. Bigger. Why do they always have to go bigger?
The third and final instalment of the Jurassic World film franchise hits UK cinemas tomorrow. Jurassic World Dominion carries off where Fallen Kingdom left off, showcasing humanity's attempts to coexist with dinosaurs. Surely nothing could go wrong. And let's take a look at some of the pictures in the papers today that have been catching our eyes. Well, yesterday you may have seen a picture of a Boris Johnson croissant, a pastry dedicated to the Prime Minister by a Ukrainian cafe. Well, now the people of Chernihiv have gone one step further with a museum painting him as one of their folklore heroes. Very fetching coat there. They've also named him Boris Chuprina, which translates to Boris Long Lock of Hair. Well, to the natural world now, and the Telegraph have this incredible close-up picture of a ladybird covered in morning dew. It's absolutely stunning. You get to see it at this size. You can see all the tiny hairs coming from it. They're inactive in the winter, but now that the weather is warmer and the days are getting longer, we are going to start to see a lot more of them. And a perfect way to start your morning now. The Express have 8 new kittens who've all become part of the Royal Mail's latest stamp collection. They're all really cute. These are some of the chosen moggies who are showing us the very best of British cats. Just these 2. They're the best ones, we've decided. Oh no, here we go. Black one, black and white one. And what about the last 2? That's it. Only 4 out of the 8. The other 4 will be furious. After the break, I'm going to talk to the former NATO Secretary General and Chairman of the Foundation, hosting a summit focusing on uniting democracy to push back against authoritarianism. Welcome back. Well, a short while ago, I spoke to the Levelling Up Housing and Communities Secretary Michael Gove. He told me that the government will keep an eagle eye on retailers taking advantage of rising fuel prices.
There are government agencies that are in a position to monitor what's happening. Again, I don't want to single anyone out because these are tough times for companies as well as individuals. But if it is the case that we do have companies that are behaving in a way which is anti-competitive, if we have companies that are taking advantage of this crisis in order to generate profits that are excessive and unwarranted because they're behaving in an anti-competitive fashion, then we can take action.
Well, Tamara is here with me now. Is he shooting a little bit of a warning across the supermarkets, Bowles?
He is, but it's unclear what the government can actually do to force supermarkets to pass that cut on. Many of them say that they are trying to do it at the moment, but whether the government can actually force them. And of course, they're facing demands to put more government support into helping people with petrol prices. The average price of filling up a family car having hit £100 today with petrol. It already reached that with diesel a couple of weeks ago. There's little sign that this is going to abate. So I think the government are already facing demands that what they have offered and the supermarkets are not passing on is not enough.
And the Right to Buy scheme that the government is relaunching today, he was very cagey about saying how many people could benefit from it. Now, of course, if you're only offering something to a handful of people, it doesn't cost a great deal, does it?
That's right. Boris Johnson's relaunch. They say it's been in the works for months, but coincidentally, it is happening today. He's going to Lancashire to give a big speech talking about extending the right to buy to tenants of housing associations. I didn't get the sense from Michael Gove this was going to be a sort of big bang transformation of the housing market like Margaret Thatcher's sell-off of council houses, because when you sell off a housing association property, he said that what they learned from doing it last time was that you have to then build a new home. That takes a couple of years and it is more expensive because you're building one from scratch and it is later on in the process. So the government is going to have to, freely admitted there, put money into it, and so the numbers will be capped initially. There have been pilot schemes of this where housing associations did it voluntarily. The take-up was not huge. So if the government can kind of make this into a really big policy, then they'll need to make sure that they've tweaked it accordingly. This is what Michael Gove told us about that cap and his admission that more borrowing would be funding it.
It will come from the overall parcel, the overall envelope of government spending at the moment. We expect that we will cap the number of people who will be able to benefit from this initially, and then it will grow over time. But it's important that government does invest in bricks and mortar. And one of the things that my department does already is to spend hundreds of millions of pounds in making sure that we can assemble the land necessary to build more homes, particularly in urban areas, because there is a pressing need when we have so many people on waiting lists, so many people in temporary accommodation, to see more homes built, and that means more social homes as well as more homes to own.
Tamara, thanks very much. We'll be getting more from you in The Take just after 9. Thank you. Well, defending Ukraine will be the focus of the Copenhagen Democracy Summit, which begins today. The event aims to unite democratic forces to push back against authoritarianism. Well, I'm joined now by the former Danish Prime Minister and former NATO Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen. Good to talk to you today, sir. This year's conference, of course, is set out against the context of war in Europe, war in Ukraine. What are you hoping will come out of it?
First of all, our purpose is to strengthen the bonds between the world's democracies. I think we are approaching a new world order where you have an autocratic camp led by China and a democratic camp led by the United States. And our aim is to make the democratic camp as strong as possible.
But how can you do that when there are, as you say, enormous countries like China, like Russia, that aren't following democratic principles?
Well, in the run-up to this summit, we have conducted an opinion poll, which is actually the largest, the broadest opinion poll ever done on democracy. And 80% of people all over the world want to live in democracy. Furthermore, the free world represents around 60% of the global economy. So if we stand together, if we can unite, then we represent a formidable force that will create some respect in Beijing and Moscow.
Even though that is the case, that it seems that most people want to live in a democracy, every year more elections are being dismissed, aren't they? In 2022, do you think democracy is under threat?
Absolutely. For the 16th consecutive year, we have seen a global decline in freedom and democracy. So I think it's high time to turn the tide. We cannot take freedom and democracy for granted. We have to fight for it. And we see that currently in Ukraine. The Ukrainian people is actually fighting on behalf of all of us. And we must stop Putin. Otherwise, he will not stop. He will continue to conquer peaceful neighbors if he isn't stopped in Ukraine.
Well, on the subject of Ukraine and President Putin, you were, of course, Secretary General of NATO, so you understand its workings very well. Are you comfortable with how NATO has dealt with what has happened in Ukraine, or do you think they should have done more?
Well, I think we have a duty to help the Ukrainians with everything they need. The Ukrainian people has the will to fight. It's our duty to provide the means to fight. So far, I've been satisfied with the unprecedented unity within the NATO alliance and among democracies in the whole world when it comes to delivery of weapons. But I think we can do more. I think the European Union should cut off all financing of Putin's war machine. It's a good step to introduce an embargo of oil, but that should be followed by an embargo of gas. No oil, no gas purchase in Russia. That would bring Putin's war machine to its knees.
Has NATO been emboldened, do you think, by what Putin has done? Of course, you're seeing Sweden and Finland now talking about membership, which they had not considered for such a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Putin has achieved exactly the opposite of what he wanted. He has, against this sad backdrop of an invasion in Ukraine, he has created more unity within NATO. And now he will also see NATO being enlarged with Finland and Sweden. He gets NATO troops closer to Russian borders. So all in all, thanks to Putin, against this very sad backdrop, we have seen a strengthened NATO.
And in terms of countries doing more to stop Putin and NATO doing more to stop Putin in terms of embargoes, do you think the UK is doing enough? Is there anything more you would like to see us doing?
I think the UK has been at the very forefront of helping Ukraine. I also appreciate the regular updates on intelligence provided by the UK. So I think Ukraine can really count the UK among its closest friends. And that may also be necessary. Once the war is over, we have to ensure that it will never happen again that Ukraine will be invaded. So Ukraine will need security guarantees one way or the other. And I think the UK, as well as the US and other big NATO allies, will play a crucial role in providing ironclad security guarantees to Ukraine.
How do you talk about the war being over? How do you think it will play out? Do you see an end game?
Well, I think the biggest risk right now is a prolonged conflict because Putin and Russia are experts in prolonged, simmering, frozen conflicts. For decades, they have occupied the eastern part of Moldova. Since 2008, they have occupied Abkhazia and South Ossetia in the state of Georgia. Since 2014, they have been in Crimea and the eastern part of of the Donbass region. So I think Putin's goal might be to continue to destabilize and weaken Ukraine through a prolonged conflict. I think this is currently the biggest risk, and that's why we have to deliver all the weapons that Ukraine needs.
We have delivered some weapons, haven't we? But also, although we are not delivering fighters officially, there are some people who've gone in there unofficially from the UK to fight, and 2 of those British soldiers we know have been captured by the Russians, possibly now facing the death penalty. Is there any hope for them that you can offer to their families? What do you think the international community could do here?
Obviously, we should do all we can to put pressure on Russia, but I'm not in a position to be too optimistic in that respect. We have seen how Russia violates all international laws and conventions. So I think the best tool would be to continue a maximum pressure on Russia. The only language that Putin understands is a language of strength, force, and unity. That's why we should continue to put a maximum of pressure on Russia through the delivery of all the weapons and cutting off all financing of Russia.
But is there not also the danger that if you do push back too hard, that he then escalates it further?
No, on the contrary. I think history has taught us that appeasement with dictators does not lead to peace. On the contrary, it leads to war and conflict. I've noted that someone has proposed that it would be dangerous to humiliate Putin. But I mean, setting the precedent that an aggressor can achieve territorial gains through a peace deal after pursuing an unjustified war, that would only encourage other dictators as well. It would send a very dangerous signal. So I think we have only one thing to do: to continue helping the Ukrainians to win this war.
OK, Anders Fogh Rasmussen, former Secretary General of NATO and Prime Minister, former of Denmark as well. Thank you very much for joining us. Now, new data reveals that twice as many online gambling accounts are linked to people in deprived areas compared to the most wealthy regions. The report commissioned by the charity Gamble Aware says those players are also more likely to suffer heavy losses. It found that the online gambling industry relies on a small percentage of customers with the largest losses for most of its revenue. Well, joining me now are Liz and Charles Ritchie, whose son Jack took his own life as a result of online gambling. Really good to talk to you both. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. Just tell us a little bit about Jack and how he got into gambling and what impact it had.
Well, Jack started gambling while he was at school. He and a large party of his friends used to go out and gamble in their dinner hour. And actually, Jack became addicted to the land-based equivalent of these very addictive games. It was actually the fixed odds betting terminals, but the same things are available online. He moved online very quickly, and he was very seriously addicted. And what the coroner found at his inquest, which we had last March, was that the information available to him and to us was absolutely woeful. The coroner used that word, woeful. To be honest, I mean, we're, as campaigners, and we met up with other bereaved families very quickly. We formed our charity Gambling with Lives, and we've been campaigning for a long time about these forms of gambling that have been found to be very, very addictive online. Frankly, it's been known for a long time. And we are pleased that finally the gambling industry partner charities have spoken out about this with this research. But to be honest, it's taken an awful long time and people have died along the way. The truth is anybody can be addicted to these terrible, terrible forms of gambling.
And how did the addiction in gambling contribute to his death?
Well, he was very clear in his suicide note, and that it was because of gambling. I mean, he'd been free for months and months before he died, but he will have been induced back by some kind of email. The coroner was very clear about it and issued 3 prevention of future deaths notices for 3 different government departments to say that the government has to act to stop this.
Charles, the impact of this, like drugs, I suppose, when a child gets involved with that, it's far-reaching, isn't it? What has the impact been on your family?
Well, I mean, it's obviously transformed our lives. We, as Liz said, very shortly after Jack's death, we set up Gambling with Lives and met with other families who'd been similarly bereaved. And so the charity does obviously family support, mutual and peer support with each other and helping families newly bereaved. But we're campaigning, that what we need is to make sure that the lessons from all the deaths that happen every year, and Public Health England estimate there are over 400 gambling-related suicides every year in England alone. And the lessons need to be learned from those deaths. So major reforms are needed around products, and this research points to the online casino and slot games. Those games need to be made much safer, less dangerous. We also need affordability checks, and I think that this report really highlights that issue about deprivation, is that the industry relies on the majority of its profits from a very small number of accounts, and a third of those are families in deprived areas. So we have to have affordability checks which kick in at a level which are meaningful. I think there's kind of an acceptance now that there needs to be some form of affordability checks, but people are talking about that, well, it kicks in at £500 losses a month or more. That is that these figures show that would be a totally inadequate response. We've got, is it 3% of accounts losing more than £2,000 a year on slots? 1% of accounts accounting for 40% of the losses. And we have to have action on affordability at preventative levels.
And the point is that millions of people in the country are affected by this. Most of them are in deprived areas, but actually the minister said very recently, anybody can be addicted to these very addictive products. They have higher addiction and risk rates than heroin. It is crazy that they are so available and so advertised.
What advice would you give, Liz, to anybody who knows family members who you think are heading in the direction of addiction to gambling?
It's asking, what are you gambling on? Because we know that some of these products are so dangerous. What we need is proper information for the public. But the reality is that the information has been controlled by the industry partner charities like GambleAware, who are subject to a voluntary system of funding. They can't afford to be too clear with the public about this. And frankly, the lack of information has cost lives. And unless the public are properly warned, like we've been warned about smoking, for example, you know, a 5-year-old knows that smoking kills. Who knows that gambling kills?
It's
Charles
important.
And Liz, I'm so sorry. We're going to have to cut you off just because we're running out of time on the programme. But
thank you for
really
having
good
us.
to talk to you. Thank you both so much, and thank you for talking to us about Jack.
Thank you.
Well, if you've been affected by anything discussed in this interview, you can always contact the Samaritans on 116 123 or email joe@samaritans.org. We've got lots more to come. Stay with us after this break.